everyone, Chef Sarah here with the Sylvia Center. We're a nonprofit specializing in providing hands-on food and nutrition education throughout New York City and Columbia County. Today we're going to make fresh pasta. Before we get started, I'm going to make sure all of our utensils and ingredients are ready to go. I already washed my hands for 20 seconds with soap and hot water, so that is good. I have sanitized and cleaned my cutting board. You could also use a countertop that's nice and clean as well if you'd rather. For our other utensils, I have a rolling pin, a knife, and a fork. And that's really all we need. You could also use a pasta machine if you have one at home, but I'm going to show you a really simple way to do this without using a pasta machine. For our ingredients, I have flour. I have all-purpose flour. You could also use whole wheat flour or a mixture of whole wheat and all-purpose if you have it, but today we're going to use all-purpose. I also have 3 eggs with half a teaspoon of olive oil and a pinch of salt that we're going to add as well. This recipe doesn't call for too much salt because when you make pasta, you should salt your water that you actually cook the pasta in, and whatever sauce you're going to add has salt as well. So it really just calls for a small pinch of salt. I'm going to show you how we go ahead and make this pasta. So as you can see, I have my 3 eggs here, and I'm going to give those just a quick little mix, and that olive oil is in there as well. So I'm going to mix that up with that fork. Okay, so once those are slightly broken up, I'm going to make sure that we have a well in our flour. So what a well is, it's just going to be kind of a hole in the middle of this flour, and that's what we're going to use to mix these eggs in. We're going to start by mixing these with our fork. Once they start to incorporate, we're going to move on to using our hands. So you can see I'm just adding just a little bit of that flour in as I'm adding these eggs. If you have a breakthrough where it kind of tries to spill over the flour, that's totally fine. You'll just keep adding a little bit and keep mixing. The more eggs we add, it gets a little bit harder. But don't worry if it goes crazy, it's all going to come together eventually. So you can see my well broke a little bit, totally fine. Just going to keep folding that back in with that flour. And I'm still using my fork at this point. And I'm just folding that flour into that egg mixture. We made these with our students a couple months ago and they absolutely loved it. With that, we used the pasta machine and we made fettuccine, spaghetti, we did some little bow ties. It was really, really fun. This is a really great activity to get kids' hands in, because we are going to need this for about 10 minutes here shortly. So it's definitely a fun activity to do in a group. Okay, so now that most of that egg is kind of starting to get mixed in, I'm going to move on to my hands. So we're going to do what we call kneading. So I am first trying to get this kind of into a nice smooth ball. There's still some clumps of eggs in there. So I'm just going to keep mixing this together until it's more of a dough where you can't see any separation between the flour and the eggs. And you can see I'm just going from the outside, taking what's on the outside and folding that into what's in the center. It's going to be really sticky at first, and that's totally fine. That's why I have some of this extra flour, and I also have extra flour next to me in this bowl. We want to keep mixing this until it is no longer sticky and it's not going to try to stick to our hands. And if you need to, you can always grab a little bit of flour and just keep adding. At this point, I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes and keep kneading. That sounds like a lot. It's kind of my workout for the day. This is where it's really good to have a buddy helping you with this, where you can, after a minute or two, tag them in and have them keep kneading. So we'll be back here in a few minutes and show you our next step. I'm going to set my timer for my 10 minutes. Okay, so our dough here, I just kneaded for 10 minutes. It seems like a long time, but you'll get through it, I promise. At this point, I'm going to cover this with either plastic wrap or a clean kitchen towel, and I'm going to let it rest for 30 minutes to 1 hour. The reason we want to do this is because as we were working this, all the glutens were activated, which means right now if I tried to roll this out, it would not roll out. So if I let this sit, it just needs to rest for that 30 minutes to an hour. That way we'll be able to roll it out really, really nice and easily. So here I have my nice clean kitchen towel, and I'm just going to cover that up, and I'll be back in a half an hour and we'll see how it's looking. Okay, so our dough is rested for a half an hour, and at this point we are going to take this. I like to cut this into smaller pieces. That way we can make sure the rest of it doesn't dry out while we're working with it. So I'm just going to cut this, cut in half, put that aside. And I'm going to cut the half and half, and I'm going to go one more time. Okay, so I have the rest of our dough covered, just once again to make sure it's not going to dry out. And I have our smaller piece of dough right here. And I'm just going to make sure there's enough flour on both sides of that. I'm going to make sure there's a little bit of flour on the rolling pin and on my hands. So I'm just going to roll this until it gets nice and thin here. And one way to make sure that you get a rectangle, because right now we kind of have this oval, if you keep folding it on top of itself, now you can see we turned that into a rectangle. That way that's going to help with waste, because if we have those rounded corners, we might get a little bit of waste. But with this, it's going to help to keep us have a nice square or rectangle shape. The goal is to get this so thin that we can read a newspaper through it or see our hand through it. So I'm going to just add a little bit more flour to both sides. And just keep rolling that until it is nice and thin. If it ever starts to stick, that's when you can add more flour. It's getting really thin here, which is our goal. I'm gonna do one more. Okay, so at this point you can see it's super thin. You can see my fingers through that. And then at this point, we want to try to get those cuts pretty nice and even. So what I like to do here is just fold that dough. That way we can go and just cut it really, really beautiful. Okay, and at this point, you want to kind of unravel all those pieces. And you can see you have some beautiful, fresh pasta right there. We're also going to try to make some bow ties. So I'm going to take one of those pieces of dough that we have setting aside. And I'm just going to cut that off. Once again, covering the rest with that nice clean kitchen towel. Okay, let's add a little more flour. And we're going to do the exact same thing we did last time. then once again, you want to get that as thin as you possibly can. And we're going to square off those edges. And then when we're making our bow ties, we want to start out by making rectangles. Okay, and then once we have a rectangle there, we are just going to pinch in the center. And that's going to give us the cutest little bow ties. Okay, so we're going to make our third type of pasta, which is called Pappardelle, which is one of my favorites. We're going to do the exact same thing as before and just roll it out as thin as we can. The reason we want to roll this really thin is because pasta will soak up some of that water. So if you have really thick pasta, once it soaks up that water, it's going to make it way, way, way too thick. So that's the reason we're trying to get this even thinner than you think you want it. Okay, and now that I have this sheet nice and thin, we are once again going to do that same fold we did before. I like to cut off those edges. And for Pappardelle, we're going to cut this really, really nice and thick. So there you go. Okay, so at this point, our pasta is ready to boil. You're going to boil this in salted water for about 2 to 3 minutes. Since it is fresh pasta, it cooks very quickly. After you strain that out of the water, you can add whatever sauce, toppings, vegetables you would like. Thank you for viewing this today. If you want more videos, activities, recipes, or community resources, visit our website. Stay healthy and keep cooking, everyone. Have a good day.